What happens when the world of conspiracy and the world of medicine collide? And then we take a look at the story of a young boy walking home one night. What should have been an ordinary journey ends up leaving this child with nothing but questions. Questions he may not want to know the answers to. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio.
Actually, I'm a lot freaked out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. Hope you guys are having a great day too. Hope you guys are having tons of fun in this unbearably hot weather. I complain about it. I complain about the hot. I complain about the cold. I'm just a big complainer. But someone who doesn't complain, whether or not he's freezing to death or burning in a fire, everyone get on your feet and give it up for Stink Bug Potato. Woohoo! Yeah! Wee! Haha! Yeah! Clapping, holding your nose at the same time because he's stinky. Stink Bug Potato, you're going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. Stink Bug made a donation during our 6th anniversary live stream special. And that is why he's going to be our chauffeur for today. If you guys can't support the show financially through the Patreon or through the merch store or anything like that, I understand. I really, really do. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. Okay, Stink Bug, I don't know how many arms you got, but I'm going to toss you one set of keys to the Hair Hovercraft. We haven't used this one in a while. The Hair Hovercraft. Everyone climb on board as Stink Bug Potato floats us out of Dead Rabbit Radio Command all the way to Nevada. Floating in this cool hovercraft. I'm a man of many interests, but you can probably count them on one hand. Obviously, the paranormal, conspiracy, true crime. Talk about that all the time on the show and in real life. I also talk about all the time in real life movies and politics. That's about it. Those are the 5 things I know enough about to have a conversation. So basically, when you hang out with me, you're going to get one of those 5 topics. I'll talk in depth about box office results and polling, politic polling, and then ghosts, conspiracy, and true crime. Most people don't like to hear about most of those topics, right? People hate hearing about politics, especially nowadays. A lot of people don't have a stomach for true crime. But sometimes I'll just be sitting there with some of my friends and something will pop up in my head, a distant memory, a story I read once. A story I read once a long time ago. The other day I was sitting with a buddy of mine and this just popped in my head. I turned to him and I said, you know what's weird? When I was a kid, I used to read the newspaper all the time. I was reading the newspaper all the time. I was watching news from a very early age. I love the news. I love journalism, the art of it, and everything. So I read the newspaper a lot when I was a kid. And I was saying, I read a story a long time ago. This must have been back in the 80s. It was about a woman whose husband was deathly ill. He was horribly sick. He had all these diseases with his lungs and his digestive tract. He was basically the Walking Dead. And he knew that, and his wife knew that. So, and again, I read the story back in the 80s, and I was unclear on some of the details as I was telling my friend this, but I go, so what happened was her husband needed medical care, needed these expenses paid, this and that. And the doctors were wondering why he was suffering from such a radical, degenerative set of diseases. It wasn't just like one thing was wrong with him. This woman's husband, this was a big article I read in the Sacramento Bee, but again, I was a kid when I read it. The wife of the husband contacts his workplace and says, hey, my husband's dying. He's going to need all of these medical bills. We believe it's related to his work. He's been working there for 20 years. Doctors have never seen anything like this. We think it's related to his job. And the employer said, we don't know what you're talking about. We have no record of him ever working here. She's like, that's impossible. He's worked there for 20 years. He's been commuting and going out all this time. He's had this job. I mean, this isn't like he just had it for a weekend. He's had this job for 20 years. The employer goes, no, he never worked for us. In fact, the place where you're claiming where he works doesn't exist. Her husband worked at Area 51. He was part of a team that was burning the failed attempts at stealth aircraft paint. This special type of alloy paint, whatever it was, that they were coating the eventual stealth fighter and the stealth bomber in. As they were working on it, they couldn't get it right for quite a while. There's a lot of research and development. So because this was so top secret, they would take all of the leftover chemicals that didn't work successfully, pour it into a pit, and burn it. So a spy couldn't sneak off with the test tube of it and take it to Russia. Have this huge burn pit. And her husband worked at one of these burn pits at Area 51. And that is how he got these horrible diseases. But when it came time for the bills to be paid, when it came time to help diagnose what he's going through, his employer, the US government, said, there is no Area 51. And your husband never worked there. So the idea was, basically, that it was a top secret base. They were working on a top secret project. They were developing the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber and the paint they were going to use to make it stealth. And because it was a top secret base at the time, now they've admitted that Area 51 is real. Kind of can't avoid it now that there's Google Earth satellites floating around, but at the time it didn't exist. It was a top secret base that didn't exist, working on a project that didn't exist. The military said, your husband never worked here, it doesn't exist, and that job doesn't exist. Burning what? Burning what, they said. We're just not doing anything out there. The military denied the claims, denied the medical claims. They weren't helping this old man get the medical care that he needed. Now, I had read that story as a kid, and I've told that story a few times over the years because, it's kind of stuff I talk about, right? You'd sit down for a little breakfast. I'm like, hey, you want to hear a story about a man slowly dying and his wife fighting for justice? I told that story a couple times over the years. Well, recently I was telling a friend that story, and I kind of thought about it, and I go, I might actually have some of the details wrong. I knew he was sick, but I was like, was she trying to get retirement benefits? Was it medical benefits? Kind of started thinking about it. I go, well, let's see if I can pull something up, because I remember reading this story as a young man, as a kid. It's a pretty pivotal story. We'll get to that in a second for me, but I go, maybe I can find this story, right? What I found instead is that this is still going on. It was shocking, and it shouldn't have been shocking, right? Because we know how these things work. I was finding articles as recent as 2022 about people who worked at Area 51 saying, dude, why am I so sick? Look at my lungs. They're horrible. And the government saying, what? You didn't work there? We don't have any records of you being there. This is still a problem. This is still going on. I put a bunch of articles in the show notes. They pretty much all say the same thing. It's usually the story of one dude or a group of people coming forward, suing the government, saying, dude, I worked here, I breathed in all this toxic smoke. So what they would do, because now we have more details about this. Back when I read it, the government was like, we don't know what you're talking about. Now we know Area 51 exists. The articles are a little more detailed. They would dig these trenches about 100 yards long, fill them full of these chemicals. Even though we have the stealth bomber, stealth fighter, we have all the technology now, they're still working on stuff there. And a lot of these claims are actually still from the 80s. People alive today being like, I'm dying. You guys got to take care of my medical bills. And the government being like, what? What medical bills? What medical bills? Is there like shape-shifting into some sort of Resident Evil nemesis type monster? We don't think there's anything wrong with you, sir. Please stop eating me. You have these people coming forward and they're saying, hey, I worked there back in the 80s. They dig these trenches 100 yards long and fill them full of all these chemicals that they were working on. They weren't getting right. As well as they were like throwing paperwork in there as well. They'd throw a bunch of because you got to get rid of the documents too, right? All the chemical, all the stuff that they're working on. They don't want the Soviets to get it, so to throw boxes of paperwork in there as well. And they began shipping in chemicals from around the country. Area 51 became the drop-off point for all your hazardous material disposal needs. They'd ship it in. It'd be a trench 100 yards long. They'd cover it in jet fuel and ignite it. And some of these claims aren't even from the people who worked at the burn pit. One of the dudes, I wrote down his name. Let me pull it up here real quick. As I'm chuckling, I don't mean to be laughing. This is a horrifying story, and it had a real effect on me as a youngster. I'll tell that story. I'll get to that. But there was a guy named Fred Dunham. He's still fighting for his medical bills to be taken care of. He didn't actually work at the burn pit. He was downwind. He worked for a private contractor that was assigned to do security at the base, Area 51. Never existed. The chemicals they were burning doesn't exist. But he's there day in, day out, breathing this chemical when they ignite it. It wasn't a constant thing, but I mean, I'd argue once or twice it's going to do some pretty bad damage to you. He goes, I was downwind of this, and I'm all messed up. A bunch of people are still trying to sue the government to get their medical bills taken care of. Now, this is a problem, and in 2015, the Supreme Court actually did a ruling on this. It took that long. That if you were exposed to one of these burn pits, if you were a contractor or you worked for the U.S. military, you were exposed to one of these burn pits, you could sue the U.S. government. But only if you were exposed to one of these burn pits in Afghanistan or Iraq. Because we were doing this stuff over there as well, unfortunately. There is a carve-out for Area 51. You cannot sue the government if you are exposed to these burn pits at Area 51 because technically nothing happened there. The base didn't exist at the time. The chemicals didn't exist. Therefore, your massive lung injuries and everything else wrong with you, that doesn't exist as well. Sorry that you're coughing up blood. Did you eat glass recently, sir? Has nothing to do with your work at Area 51. I was shocked, but I shouldn't have been, that this is still going on. The government's still fighting this. And the reason why I find this story, first off, this is one of those stories that I think that more people should know about. This is a story that I think more people should know about because this is an ongoing thing. Secondly, conspiracy theorists don't appear out of nowhere. You know, reading stuff like this when I was a kid, and I remember when I was in probably high school, maybe late middle school, but I think it was high school, we were learning about after World War I, the government wasn't paying the veterans any benefits. And people were horribly maimed and breathing in all this mustard gas and stuff during the war. And then when they got out, the government's like, hey guys, thanks for your service. And then the politicians just went back to work, and there was almost a revolution, almost a junta, right? A military-led coup over this. You had all these veterans of World War I showing up to Washington, D.C. They all got guns. They all know how to use them. And the government's like, okay, we'll pay you benefits. And I remember, reading stuff like that, I learned from a very early age that the government is not your friend. And this isn't a thing against the United States government. This is really against any government. Governments are a self-sustaining machine. Their goal is to have a population that pays taxes so they can keep going. But it's the main motivator of any government is to sustain itself. So you want to make sure that you have a broad tax base. You want to make sure that your people are able to pay those taxes. You want to enforce the payment of those taxes. And then everything else kind of comes along with that, like national defense. If you don't have a national defense, the government will crumble. The government is a self-sustaining machine, and its main reason to exist is to continue its own existence. Government does good stuff, government does bad stuff, but I learned from an early age that you can't trust your government, especially blindly. And it was articles like this that I read as a kid. I go, and about, the Veterans Revolution or it was this huge thing. I go, you can't trust them blindly. Also, when I was very young, I was probably maybe 8 or 10 when this happened. Me and my family, my grandma, my grandpa, and my great grandma, we had a very bad interaction with the police. There's a long story, but I remember seeing clearly, like with my own eyes, how dismissive the police were to us. It was basically these drunk drivers crashed into my grandma's front yard and smashed into a car, and they were completely hammered, and they were like breaking our cars. They were busting our windows of the cars to move the Corvette, my grandma's Corvette, out of the way so they could get their car back on the road. It was this huge thing. We called the police. The police took like 2 hours to get there. And when they got there, they could care less, or couldn't care less, however it is. And they're super dismissive towards us. And I remember like getting one of the cops' face. I'm wearing like little Captain America pajamas that were probably too tight on me. And I was like, oh, don't talk to my grandma like that. And they just didn't care. The police didn't care. And to me, I was like, oh my God, my family's in danger. All of a sudden, there's like 20 teenagers out in our front yard smashing windows and having this huge thing. It was like a multi-car incident. Anyways, I learned from that age, the police, you can't rely on the police either. Now listen, there are really good people who work for the government. Some people have the best intentions, and there are really good police officers as well. I've had good interactions with police since, and I've had bad interactions with police since. That happened, but I learned as a kid that you can't rely 100% on authority figures. If anything, it's toss-up. It's a 50-50 whether or not you can rely on them. And that did, I think, when you don't trust your government, I give them a little bit of credit, right? I'm not completely anti-government by any means, but I see them as realistic. You know, you walk into a Walmart, and for the most part, Walmart wants to keep their customers happy. Stores clean. You don't have to worry about going in and, you know, catching some disease from sitting on their toilet, or that their packaging isn't going to explode in your hands. Stuff like that, right? But at the end of the day, they're there to make money. And that's kind of how I see government, and even things like the police, right? It's an organization that needs to sustain itself. The people that they're protecting is kind of a secondary thing. So, to me, reading stories like this in the newspaper and finding out that it's now still going on, it does develop a distrust for the government. And I think that's where conspiracy theorists can often be born. Sometimes they're anti-science conspiracy theorists, like Flat Earth. They don't believe in the scientific community. Sometimes they're anti-government conspiracy theorists, and they take it a little too far, right? You know, like you got groups like Branch Davidians or whatever. You got groups, militia groups and stuff like that might take it a little too far. But I do think that events like this, like reading that article, were pivotal in me going, the government doesn't have our best interests at heart all the time. And it's sickening, really. This conspiracy theory is pretty sickening. The people who signed up to serve with the military, you figure that the government should take care of them. They're sacrificing their time and sometimes their bodies, in this case their health, because they believe they're working towards a greater good, and the government just discards them on the side. I know my uncle, I've talked about him before, but my uncle has told me, he served in Nam, that they used to have canisters of Agent Orange, which was a defoliant. We poured it all over the jungles of Vietnam. We're like, you can't hide in the trees if there are no trees. It just rot away the jungle. He said we'd be sitting next to a barrel of it, just standing there, open barrel. You know what? Whatever. It's just a chemical created to destroy nature. What's it going to do to me? Well, he has had neurological damage from that. And if I remember the story correctly, again, it's been a long time since we've talked about it, but it took him a long time and his fellow veterans a long time to get compensated for that, because the government's like, oh, what are you talking about? And it's funny, even in my lifetime, remember this? They don't ever talk about this anymore. Gulf War syndrome. We had these veterans coming back during the first Gulf War with some serious neurological conditions, and then there was a whole lot of birth defects. This was a big news story at the time, like it'd be in Time and Newsweek and stuff like that. Photos of these babies who had birth defects, and it was called Gulf War syndrome. They said they can never exactly figure out what it was. One of the theories was, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons, and we weren't aware of it. The other one was that when Saddam Hussein set the oil fields on fire in Kuwait, that caused all of this. But the other theory is This was a time when the US government was using in large supply shells. I think they're mostly coming out of the A-10 Warthog. These bullets that were made from depleted uranium. When you shoot one into a tank, it would burn everyone alive inside. It was just superheated. And they were scattering these rounds all over the desert as these A-10 Warthogs were coming down and destroying these Iraqi tanks. And there was the theory that it could have been us. Could have been people just being exposed to all of this depleted uranium, which sounds like it could cause a few birth defects. But again, I remember that was a big news story back in the day, and then people were like, well, but we don't know what it is. Call it Gulf War syndrome. Some people thought it might have just been in people's heads, and, they didn't have more defects than normal, and the baby was going to be born like that. Very, very interesting the way that the government, and when I say interesting, I mean absolutely tragic, but the way, I'll put some articles in there about Gulf War syndrome. But just the way that the veterans are treated, and really just citizens in general can be treated by the government. Again, but I'm not, this isn't an anti-American or an anti-American government thing. Every government does this, and it sucks. It totally sucks. I wish that wasn't the case, and maybe someday it won't be. But governments are a self-sustaining machine, and whatever it takes to sustain it, it will do. If a couple people die, or a couple people get lung cancer, or a couple people are born with defective parts, birth defects and stuff like that, well, so be it. The quote-unquote greater good was served. Saddam Hussein was pushed out of Kuwait. We developed the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber, which gave us an edge to this day even. Still gives us an edge in aerial combat, aerial reconnaissance and attacks, bombing runs, all this stuff. But it is tragic. It's an absolutely tragic story, and I think it's one that most people don't know about. And for me, it was very formative. It was a very, very formative story for me to come across. And from that, a conspiracy theorist was born. I read that article on Alex Jones, find me. Isn't that, I watched Alex Jones' last broadcast. He says he might come back on, but that's a totally different story. I want to talk about that later in the week, but yeah, Alex Jones, the InfoWars, it's done. His entire company's getting chopped up, but we'll talk more about that in detail as that goes forward. Stinkbug Potato, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world famous Carpenter Copter. We are leaving behind Nevada. Why don't you go ahead and fly us all the way out to Sweden? As we're headed out there, I want to do a really quick Dead Rabbit Radio recommends. Recently, I recommended 2 movies, Yellowbrickroad, which is a great, creepy urban legend. These guys are trying to investigate the story about an entire town that went for a hike one day and vanished. So these filmmakers, these legend trippers, they decide to walk the path known as the Yellowbrickroad and solve the mystery. Very, very haunting, low-budget horror movie. A couple of years later, that was directed by Andy Mitten and Jesse Holland. It was written and directed by this team. A couple of years later, I watched another movie of theirs called We Go On. I recommended this one recently. It's a movie about a guy who puts an ad in the newspaper and says, if you can prove to me the existence of a life after death, I'll pay you $50,000. It's dope. It's really cool. I really like Yellowbrickroad. We Go On. Both of them are very creepy movies. They're uniquely unsettling in different ways. The last movie I want to recommend is the most recent one. This one's just by Andy Mitten. He wrote and directed it himself. It's called The Witch in the Window. And it is a very classic American ghost story. I describe it as low-budget, lo-fi horror. There's no special effects. The story is about a man who buys a house. He's going to flip it, but this house happens to be haunted. It's like an American fairy tale. It's very creepy in a super subdued way. It's quite unlike most other haunted house movies that I've seen because of the tone. And also, I think not having a bunch of special effects really helps. Really helps. But I really can't, like, all of their movies, you can't really say too much about because I think it gives a lot of stuff away. I mean, they're very basic plots. But when you start watching them, We Go On has a ton of twists and turns. Halfway through, you feel like you're watching a different movie. Yellow Brick Road is just a journey into madness. Fantastic. Both of those movies are fantastic, but there's a subtlety to The Witch in the Window that is very, very attractive. All three of these movies I've watched twice, which I very rarely watch a movie twice. I mean, I've watched 300 probably like 7 or 8 times, okay? I've watched Transformers 3 a bunch of times, Spider-Man 2 a bunch of times. There are movies that I will watch over and over again. But as far as a horror movie goes, I mean, I saw The Ring 3 times in the theater. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, opening weekend. It's very rare that I watch a horror movie more than once. And all 3 of these movies I've watched twice. So Dead Rabbit Radio recommends The Witch in the Window. If you're looking for something different, definitely check it out. It is such a interestingly constructed horror movie while still feeling tense and scary and familiar like other horror movies. There's just something about the way that the story is told and the story itself that I find intriguing, very, very intriguing. And I can't wait to see what else Andy Mitten and Jesse Holland are going to be bringing to the horror movie table. Because these guys, this is some of my favorite recent horror movies. And I feel like they're not getting enough praise because they're definitely doing something different and it works. It really works. So Dead Rabbit Radio recommends The Witch in the Window. And if you haven't seen them yet, Dead Rabbit Radio also recommends Yellow Brick Road and We Go On. We're headed all the way out to Sweden. Stockholm, Sweden to be exact. It's the 1970s, and the month is October, the spookiest month of all. We're about to meet this young boy. Let's call him Michael. He's 8 years old when this story takes place. It's 8:30 p.m., and he's out for a walk. Now, it's a walk in October, so it's darker than normal. Spookier, because it is the spookiest month on the calendar. Michael had recently gone to the Scout facility. Apparently they have something like the Boy Scouts over there. He goes there, hangs out. They're probably like, I don't know, like sticking twigs in each other's eyes and like building box race cars or whatever Boy Scouts do, I don't know. The Boy Scouts, he leaves the Boy Scouts. He's like, both of his eyes have twigs in them. He's like, why do I keep coming back here? I got my merit badge for most pierced eyes. He's leaving behind the facility. He's walking back home. It's only a 20-minute walk. It's a really nice area as well. His parents aren't concerned. He's not concerned. The scoutmaster's like, whatever, bro. You can leave. You can walk down these dark streets yourself. And Michael, he's made this walk many times before. He's 8 years old, which sounds terribly young, right? Nowadays, you'd be like, don't even cross the street. But back in the 70s, he's like, whatever, I'm going to go walk by myself. I'm going to walk home. He's made this walk 100 times. It's just 20-minute walk. The weather's great. Beautiful night sky hanging above his head. Now, it's possible, actually, that if you live in the area, if you live in Sweden, you might be able to find this spot. There's a couple clues. He actually said he lives in a neighborhood just south of Stockholm, Sweden. So, general area. He says part of this walk headed home is there is a place where it is like this mountain, this small mountain ridge, had a cut through it to put this road in. So he says he's walking down the sidewalk, and there's a couple cars driving down the road. It's not super late. It's around 8:30. But apparently there's a place in this mountain ridge where it's been cut away, and there's a 2-lane road there. Sidewalks on either side. So if you live in Sweden, you're like, oh, Jason, Sweden's a huge country. Stockholm's a big city. I don't know if I can figure out exactly where this kid was, but he's walking down this part of the street. Since this is where there was a road cut through a little mountain ridge, basically there's the sidewalks, the roads in between them, and then a mountain, like a big stone thing right next to you. So there's not many places you could go. You're just walking a straight line. You could walk in the middle of the road and get hit. If you had a little if you had a little hook and a little climbing gear, maybe you climb the mountain. For the most part, you can just walk on this sidewalk. Michael's walking, and he takes a step, and the world begins to slow down. Michael realizes that now his entire body is moving slower. It's almost like on autopilot. His foot is still mid-step, but he's beginning to realize that everything's slowing down. He doesn't know why. His brain's trying to make sense of this when all of a sudden tunnel vision begins to set in. He can no longer see the side of the mountain. He can no longer see the road. All he can see is what's directly in front of him. It's like the entire world has disappeared except for the sidewalk before him. His foot is still slowly moving through the air. It hasn't completed that step. He hasn't touched down to the sidewalk and the other foot moves and the other... No, he's still in this single moment, slowly moving, yet not completing. When all of a sudden, he didn't recognize this at the time. It would be years before he actually would hear this noise. But he said the best I can do to describe it is the THX noise at a movie theater. That bass. He didn't have the other part. He didn't have the THX part. He's like, it's a big logo. But that booming bass. Then the entire world falls silent. Michael is posting this. Michael says at this point that there was, quote, no cars, no people, no movement, no nothing, unquote. He was alone in the world, a silent world, a slowed down world. So slow at this point, he can't even feel himself moving. One leg still extended. One footstep unfinished. For 15 seconds, Michael estimates, for 15 seconds he was stuck in this moment. And then his foot touches the ground. And his other leg lifts up to take another step to complete the walk. As if it had never stopped in the first place. This automatic motion, this movement. His other leg lifts up to take another step and then splash. He feels it step into a big puddle. There's a puddle of water right in front of him on the sidewalk. A puddle that he hadn't seen before. A puddle that wasn't there before. That is when Michael realizes his clothing is soaking wet. His hair is dripping water. Rain is drizzling from the sky. He's standing out there and he's looking around. Looks up, he can feel the rain on his face. He's drenched. But just a second ago, beautiful night sky, not a cloud out. The weather calm and crisp, the perfect night to walk home. Now he's drenched and it's raining. And Michael says in this moment, I wasn't frightened. If anything, I was more curious. Because I couldn't figure out what happened. But I just continued on my way home a little bit quicker. Sure, because he realizes something is off and it's raining. He doesn't want to get sick. When he finally gets home, he wants to tell his parents what happened. He's like thinking in his head, oh, I'm going to tell him, I was out walking. All of a sudden, like a rainstorm happened. That's pretty weird. But he doesn't have a chance to tell his parents. Because when he walks through that door, he sees them look at him, and a mixture of relief and anger crosses his parents' faces. Where have you been, dude? Where have you been? It's 9:55 p.m. He should have been home an hour ago. He left the Boy Scouts at 8:30. It's a 20-minute walk at the latest. 8:50 is when he should have walked through that door. Parents were getting ready to call the police. They had been out looking for him. And they start asking, where have you been? Where have you been? And he's like, what do you mean, where have I been? I just walking home. I just left. I just left. I left 20 minutes ago, but I'm home. And his parents are, at this point, yelling at him. You don't know how terrified we were. We were about to call the police. And the father said, son, I went looking for you. I walked the path you walk 3 times. You weren't walking home. I walked there and back to the scout facility, talking to your friends. Where were you? And Michael's like, I swear to God, I was just walking down the street. And his parents are getting madder and madder. Because there is that mixture. I mean, man, missing somebody like that, losing a kid like that, I imagine must be the worst feeling in the world. And then when they show up, there is that mixture of like that anger, but that relief. You got him back. You got him back, but now you're mad that you had to go through all these emotions in the first place. And they're yelling at Michael, and Michael is normally not like this. He begins yelling back. He's actually getting angry that they won't believe him that he was just walking home. I left at 8:30. I was out there for 20 minutes. I'm home. And now he's yelling at his parents, and his parents are yelling at him. And it becomes this match. He can't believe that they don't believe him. And they can't believe that he's lying. He's lying directly to their faces. But as they're getting madder and madder, the father, he pauses for a second. And he looks at Michael and he realizes, this isn't like Michael. Why is Michael so angry? This isn't like our son. And he turns to his wife, and the dad goes, honey, I think he's telling the truth. I think that's why he's mad. Because he's telling the truth and he doesn't understand why we don't believe it. The mom actually starts to calm down because, again, they'd never seen their son get this mad before. And Michael feels this huge wave of relief wash over him because he knows for a fact it was only a 20-minute walk. And he's telling them, I walked home. And when the mom calms down, when tempers start to simmer, Michael realizes he has not mentioned anything about what he experienced. The thing that he wanted to tell them the second he walked through the door, he got so swept up in the emotion, he didn't say anything. The mom asked, because the dad says, I walked that route 3 times, there and back, looking for you, calling out for you. There was no sign of you anywhere. And the mother asks, she goes, Michael, did anything happen to you on this walk? Anything that could explain why you were gone for so long? Because he was gone. It was 9:55. They weren't wrong. It's not like the clock was broken. It did take him more than an hour to get back. And that's when he remembers, oh my God. I mean, I don't know if it's anything, But I was walking home and then everything went slow. And I heard this weird noise. And then I started walking again, but I was dripping wet. It started raining. That's the weirdest thing. I was excited to tell you guys about it until we started yelling at each other. Michael's father and mother listen to this story, but they don't ask him any follow-up questions. They just listen to it. At the end of the day, they're relieved to have their son. I imagine losing a kid like that for an hour, having no idea where they were at. They're already trying to talk to his friends, calling up families that maybe he went home with someone, maybe he's spending the night at a house. They're just relieved to have him back. However, a couple of years later, Michael and his dad are hanging out. And this topic comes back up. They hadn't talked about it at all for years. And the father asked Michael, he said, quote, "You were gone, son. As if you had simply vanished from the face of the earth. You were missing for more than an hour. Where did that time go? Where did you go?" Unquote. Michael, even to this day, he posted this pretty recently underneath the name Alpha Imposter. He says this happened, now he's, in his 50s. He goes, I don't know. I don't know what happened. He goes, I didn't see a portal open up. I didn't see aliens. In fact, I didn't really see anything. Everything just kind of slowed down. I got tunnel vision. Everything in the world seemed to disappear. I heard this weird noise, and then I'm dripping wet. He goes, I don't know what it was. I didn't see anything. I didn't experience anything outside of that. Him and his father could never figure it out. Years after that, his father had passed away. He was talking about it with his mother, and his mother kind of chuckled, and she goes, I always thought you got abducted by aliens. Michael says, because he's had years and years, decades really, to kind of think about this. He goes, there was no, because, people have, he's brought this up over the years. He's brought it up online. I think he's brought it up in his personal life as well, but wasn't, going around telling everybody about it. But he goes, all of the things that you think that it possibly could be, lightning strike, seizure, something like that, amnesia. He goes, those are all possible. In a sense, the lightning strike, he probably would have suffered some damage. He did get poked in the eye with all those sticks, though. He might be used to it. He goes, the thing is that there's not, on that part of sidewalk that I was on, he goes, on the one side's the rock wall, on the other side's the cars. He goes, so it's not like, he goes, let's say I had a seizure. Let's say that I had a seizure. And he fell on the ground. He goes, my dad would have seen me. My dad walked that exact same route that I took all the time. He walked it 3 times. He goes, there weren't a bunch of bushes that I could have fallen into. There wasn't a hill leading into a creek that I could have rolled down or anything like that. He goes, had I got struck by lightning, had I had a seizure, which those are all possible things, right, that could simulate this type of neurological activity. He goes, I would have been on the sidewalk. My dad would have found me. Even if a car didn't stop, he goes, there was really no place for me to roll away and not be seen. Even if he had amnesia, it would have happened in that second. But the time loss, you can imagine that he had some sort of neurological event, but then again, where did that time go? And even if it was some sort of amnesia, his father still would have found him. Michael wouldn't have remembered who the guy was. He'd be like, oh no, it's this weirdo. He runs away back to the scouts. But he also says, on a realistic level, he goes, I don't think it's any of those. He goes, but I also don't know what it could be. He keeps going back to, I didn't see a portal. He goes, I didn't see the air shimmering in front of me. I didn't see an opening or anything like that. It was almost like the absence of all those things. As far as the alien thing goes, Michael did leave a clue, but he also says, he goes, I don't know when this started. He goes, I don't remember if this started before this incident or if it started after it. But he said throughout his life, when he was young, up until the age of around 14, he had a reoccurring dream. And the dream is he would be out walking around and an object would appear in the sky that was falling towards Earth. And he said this object was hurtling towards the ground, but it was so large, you knew you couldn't get out from underneath it. You could run as fast as you wanted to. This object descending from the heavens, hurtling towards the earth. You could run as fast as you wanted to. You wouldn't be able to escape. It would crush you no matter what. That's actually a pretty creepy dream when I read that. I mean, talk about hopelessness. Something is coming and it's going to crush you, and you see it coming, and you see that if it was smaller, you might be able to escape its shadow before it flattens you and everything else in its path. But no, this thing is so huge. You can run and run and run and run. You'll never escape it. At this point, he's in his 50s. And he still does not know what happened that night. He has said that he did try going through like hypnosis, seeing if he could have any of these memories recovered. He said it didn't work on him. There are people who hypnosis doesn't work on. But here's the other thing, and this is how we want to wrap it up here. It is truly a mystery. It's a phenomenon that cannot be explained. We've talked about this on past episodes. Sometimes that's a good thing. Okay? Sometimes if you find yourself in a moment like this, and I understand wanting to know. I understand wanting to know the answer to what happened, but our brain does have safety mechanisms built into it that when we experience traumatic events that we just can't comprehend, I mean, sometimes we just go into shock. Sometimes you may see something horrific and then just kind of walk away from it. Like turn away from the car accident and you're walking back down the street and you may not even remember you saw such a horrific accident. Blood everywhere, not making it super gory, guts flying out, kids all, ah! But you know what I mean? Sometimes we see horrible stuff and our brain doesn't let us comprehend it. And that's what allows us to get on with our lives. This doesn't generally happen during happy moments. Very rarely will you have the best day of your life. Everyone's saying hi to you. You get an awesome gift. Someone bakes you a cake. You're probably not going to forget about it. You're probably not going to be like, oh, what happened yesterday? You got frosting all over your face. Where'd this come from? No. If it was a happy memory, if the place Michael went was fun or adventurous, a new world, a vision of an existence outside of our own, a journey some of us could only dream of, if it was anything positive, most likely he would have remembered it. If it was something negative that he did pass through this portal and for an hour or however time may work in this other reality, he was left in a barren landscape devoid of all life with an unfamiliar moon hanging high in the crimson red sky. He was lost and lonely, fearful of every moment he spent there. It's probably a good thing he didn't remember. Because you would wonder, if I can walk down the street and this happen, am I ever truly safe? And then we look at the alien angle, which I think is clearly kind of where Michael is thinking as well. He doesn't out and out say that he thinks he was abducted by aliens. His mom does. And we do see those normal things we see in some alien abductions. Lost time. Well, I guess that's the only thing that really points to aliens, but we have the lost time and then we have that dream. Again, getting abducted by aliens, if it's a fun adventure where you end up eating pancakes with them, I'll put that episode in the show notes. It's a classic UFO story. If it's a fun alien adventure, the people tend to remember what happened. If you ever find yourself missing a period of time, I understand you want to know what happened, but it's possible that there's reasons why you don't remember. There were things that were going on that were too horrific for you to even comprehend, and you're lucky you don't remember. Because again, the same thing. If you were walking home and you were abducted by aliens and taken aboard this craft and subjected to horrific medical experiments, that even scientists, human scientists back in the 1800s would say, whoa, dude, you're going too far. That's way too gross, even for us. And we were doing vivisections on cats and dogs. It might be a good thing we don't remember. It's a double-edged sword. I understand that quest for wanting to know all the answers, but sometimes the answer can be so horrible, it's best that we don't remember it. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. What the rest of it? TikTok. Wait, what is it? DeadRabbitRadio. Aliens have interfered in my brain. I got abducted for a minute. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day. I'm glad you listened to it today.